Shabbat Shalom. I get frustrated so much going through the book of Genesis because it reveals all of its beauty and its truth, and yet when I hear people refer to it, they always are not just getting it wrong, but getting it wrong in some insulting and painful and often destructive way. And the story of Noah, well, it's right up there, because the story of Noah has become a litmus test of how much of a faithful fool you are. That is to say, do you believe in God so much that you are willing to check out your brain and not actually think about the words, but just sign on the dotted line because that's what your priest or reverend has told you is believing in God? And boy, have people bought that hook, line, and sinker and completely kicked the story of Noah into the trash for what it is actually trying to teach us. Because it is not trying to teach us that the world is only a literal 5,000 some years old. It is not trying to teach us that there was literally a giant box in which all the animals of the world could fit in. It is not trying to teach us any of that. And yet you have museums dedicated to the story of Noah, which, by the way, the replica of Noah leaked in the rain, and their ark, yeah, it's the greatest irony. They couldn't even build an ark in the 20th century that would stand up to modest rain in the middle of the country, and yet they believe somehow that this is a story trying to test the faithful. It is so frustrating. So what is actually going on here? Well, let's start with the symbol of Noah at the end of the story, and a symbol that again has become politicized, controversial, and pain in the tuchas. The symbol at the end of the story of Noah that shows us that everything has come to a happy conclusion is the rainbow. The rainbow, the keshet in the sky. Wonderful rainbow in the sky. And now when you say the word rainbow, you see people quickly rush to the voting booths in order to respond to that terrible symbol. Okay, well, first of all, we need to unpack what the rainbow actually means in the story. Because everybody who paints it on the walls of their children's playroom, well, you may not be doing what you think you're doing. Because that symbol is indeed a symbol of hope, but it also comes with a dark side. And I'm not just talking about the rain clouds that came before it. There is a teaching about Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, one of the great sages of the late Tanaic period, the period of the rabbis of the Mishnah, that during his life, there was never a rainbow in the sky. During his life, there was never a rainbow in the sky. Now, in modern 21st century America, we would be scratching our head going, what do you mean no rainbows? Isn't that like terrible? Rainbows are beautiful things. Why would there be no rainbows? God didn't like you enough to give you the full color spectrum in the sky? Or did it not rain enough? Was this a drought statement? What's going on here, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, or Rashbi, as he is called in the acronym? Well, let's unpack. What does God say the rainbow symbolizes in the text of the story of Noah? You'll be forgiven if you didn't get that far ahead because it wasn't in our public reading. But remember, you're supposed to be reading the entirety of the parasha before Shabbat, so you come in having already done the reading. Nothing frustrates me more than students who don't do the reading before the class discussion. That he would never flood the earth again. He would never destroy. That the constancy of nature would continue unabated. Right? Day and night, heaven and earth, all of these are going to keep going along the track of nature that God has laid out. Which means when the rainbow shows up, God is reminding himself of that promise. That God is like, I am sure, nope, can't do it. Rainbow guys, it's okay. Rainbow, I know I looked angry right there, but rainbow time. I'm not going to destroy you. I want to. You deserve it, but I'm not going to because I made a promise, right? I made a promise. So the rainbow is actually a sign of God reining himself in. It is a reminder to us that God was on the verge of destroying the world again, but chose not to. And the rainbow was there to remind all of us of that choice. So when you paint a rainbow on the wall, it's telling your kids in their little playroom, you know, but I'm not going to. Which maybe parents have that feeling at certain times. I don't know, but maybe you don't want to immortalize it in a mural on the wall. So when Rashbi said, well, when it was said about Rashbi that there was never a rainbow during his lifetime, it was huge praise. The rabbis were saying that if only for him being alive, just for him, regardless of anything else going on, God would never even contemplate destroying the world. So no rainbow was needed to remind us of God's promise, because Rashbi was all of the guarantee we needed for him to not be, for God not to destroy the world. So, sounds very strange in 21st century. Like I said, people don't bother to read the text, and then they come up with all sorts of weird ideas. One of those weird ideas is embedded within both that story as well as the story of Noah. And it is the fundamental flaw in the way people read it and understand its importance. Like I said at the beginning, the story of Noah is not important because it forces you to believe something that sounds ludicrous. That is a very new idea. It was foreign to Judaism until only maybe 50 years ago. But instead, it is trying to tell us something, well, ostensibly about God, but like everything else in Torah, eventually we realize we are looking in a reflection, and it is meant to be about us. So, when God is getting ready to do the flood, when God is laying out this to Noah, when we see the end of last week's Torah portion, it says that God is unhappy. God regrets that he has made humanity because, man, have they messed up. Humanity has corrupted themselves and indeed the entire planet. And God is like, you know what? Well, this just stinks. So why did I even bother making a world if this is what you're going to do with it? Why did I even make you exist, humanity, if this is the way you're going to behave? Now, we can all relate to that, yes? Does God change his mind? Like, literally, does God change his mind? Is God capable of changing God's mind? No. Absolutely not. Right? Let me explain to you why. It's actually a very simple proposition once you examine it. We believe that God is of perfect wisdom and knowledge. Right? God doesn't make mistakes, you can say in short answer. God knows everything. Great. That means that at some point, God had one idea, and then if we're going to claim that he changed his mind, now he has a new idea. Pick one, because they can't both have been true. Right? When I change my mind, it's because I made a mistake, and I've learned something new, and now I have a better understanding. Perfectly normal. All of us should change our minds quite often if we're still learning new things, and if you're not learning new things, shame on you. But God doesn't learn new information. God doesn't get a new insight. God doesn't grow in wisdom. God is at 100%, if not infinite, from day one, well, before there were even days, as we found out last week. So God cannot change his mind. God can't regret something. What, God didn't know humanity would be corrupt? God didn't know that we would make mistakes? God didn't know people would lie, cheat, and steal and harm one another? Of course God knew that. God knew that before he even made the first human being. God knows exactly what will happen at the very end of time. So it's not as though God is suddenly being hit with new information and now has to change the plan. Feels like that on earth because we discover new aspects of God. We discover that, you know what? What we are doing, boy, I bet this isn't what God wants. Wouldn't God be surprised to see how stupid we're behaving? Well, God's not surprised, but from our point of view, we use that anthropomorphic language because it helps us to reflect and relate to what is fundamentally the unrelatable and unknowable aspect of God. With me so far? Question, yes?
What about, I'm jumping ahead here, what about when Moses tells God, like, to not wipe out the Israelites?
The Israelites. Yes. What happens when Moses convinces God not to wipe out the Israelites? What happens when God appoints Saul king first and then regrets it later? What happens multiple times where we have the same language? It is exactly the same thing. That is to say, God was never actually going to wipe us out because Moses was always going to voice what God knew, which was that this won't work, God. But it wasn't that Moses was changing God's mind. It was revealing to us through the arc of that conversation what we needed to know, which, coming back to the story of Noah, is the primary thing I want to explain, is what is it that we need to know from the story of Noah based upon this understanding of God? Yes? Yeah, it wasn't all of a sudden, though. Hold on to that thought. Hold on to that thought. It was not all of a sudden, and that's getting us a little closer to where we need to be in this boat. Okay, God doesn't change his mind, which means at the end of the story, when God's like, you know what? Floods are a bad idea. Global destruction, turns out that's not so great. I'm not going to do that anymore. What, God needed to go through the flood to figure that out? Again, if we believe that, then we are shrinking our conception of God down to being just a giant person with superpowers that happens to be invisible. And that is a terrible way to relate to God. It's the way many ancients did, and when you look at what their gods got up to, yeah, you could feel that, but that was not the benchmark of God in Judaism. Instead, God is trying to walk us through a very important thought process so that we come to a very important conclusion, which, as I said at the beginning, it frustrates me greatly that no one seems to talk about because they're too busy worried about how Noah would have handled all the manure on the ark. The question is, how do we actually make the world a better place? That's the story of Noah's Ark. How do we the humans, make the world a better place? Because the story last week was, we're going to get to decide between right and wrong. We're going to get our own ideas about right and wrong, or doing what is right in our eyes versus what is right in God's eyes. And we're going to make mistakes. Now, it is tempting, if you are a self-righteous, sanctimonious person who believes that everything you do is perfectly fine and right, which many people are prone to imagine that the best solution to all the bad people in the world would be for God to blow them up. Couldn't God just start doling out the lightning bolts left, right, and center? You know, as a matter of fact, how about a nice flood? Because the only people I know that are decent in the world are me and my family. So we'll go sit on a boat. God, you wipe the world clean, and then we'll start over again with me and my righteous family. You were here last night or listened to the sermon, you know that doesn't work so well because Noah's family's got some pretty horrible flaws built into it. We fool ourselves by imagining the main problem in the world is just that we haven't gotten rid of all of the bad people the best way. The battery died. Changed it during the week. See? Best laid plans with my phone. No? Nope, it is definitely blinking. Okay, we're going to do it this way. Well, as loud as I can get, it's not going to carry into the live stream all that well. So this will work. As my father-in-law, blessed memory, would call it a lollipop, but I'll do my best. All right. So let's back up again, make sure I catch my stride on this explanation. We might think, because we're good people, that the biggest problem in the world is that God hasn't blown away all the bad people. That's what we need, right? We need a good purge. We need just the sweeping hand of God to come down and just push all of the terrible people into a grave, and then the world would be fine. That's what we're waiting for. That's it. And in the meantime, I'll just hide myself away with my family or my friends that I believe are good, although I have doubts around some of them, and
wait for God's justice. Eventually, God will open the heavens and destroy all the baddies. And then the world will be good. And the story of Noah's Ark comes along to tell humanity, no, I'm not going to do that, says God. That's not how this game is going to play. You can't just say, they're cheating, and expect the ref to show up, grab them, and throw them to the dogs. Because that is not how this world works. This world works according to the laws of nature, the laws that God had built into it from the beginning. And it is not going to solve your problems by having a natural disaster remove all of your enemies in a very convenient way. Nor do you want that, says God. Because trust me, God is implying, all of you mess up. Lots. You may think that the guy next door is terrible, and he might be. And he might even be more terrible than you. But you think you're some angel? You think you're some perfect person that if God was getting out the good old bam hammer, that it wouldn't hit you at least a little? And you honestly think that the world we live in would still function if all of the so-called bad people that I'm sure you've got a list of were taken out? Great. Who's doing all the other things in the world that make your life possible now? You think there's only like going to be 1,000 of you left? 10 of you left? You think life was easy for Noah after the flood? It was horrible. Why do you think he ends up drunk and naked in his tent? He is not a happy man having survived this. You imagine you'd be happy if all your enemies were destroyed by the hand of God. Learn from the story of Noah. That's not how it works. That's not how God works. We are here in the story of Noah to learn that destruction is not going to save us. That the removal of our enemies by some divine providence is not going to save us. That is not the purpose of our existence, and it is not the function of God as a relationship in our existence. God is not there to take the naughty kids out of the playpen so that we can play with the stuffed animals all by ourselves. It is a fundamental flaw of how people read this story because they forget the end where God says, I'm not doing this again. I'm not doing this again. Okay. So what's the solution? Well, the solution is built into the story of Noah's Ark. God doesn't just get out the big old lightning bolts and start smiting people. God tells Noah, build a boat. A really, really big boat. Huge, huge, huge boat. And do a whole lot of work with a whole lot of animals. And then you're going to be stuck in that boat for a year. And when you get out, the world is going to be in ashes or sodden, and you're going to have to rebuild everything. That is the template God is giving us. You want things better? Good. God applauds that you recognize that there is a better way to live than the way of evil that was found in the times of Noah. Good. Great. You have passed the first test. You have figured out that life is meant to be better than many people are currently living it. That life should be free of the suffering and pain that so many people cause to each other. Sometimes by accident, oftentimes maliciously. Good. Wonderful. You are now a level 1 basic human being. You want things to be better? Go do it. Build your boat. Gather the animals. Prepare and work in order to make things better. But don't expect that God is going to wipe them all out in some magical moment. Judaism doesn't go in for the whole nonsense of the rapture. Even when we talk about the wars of the final days, guess what? We're still suiting up. We're still grabbing that sword and shield and heading out to the field of battle against the forces of Gog. Because the war ain't going to fight itself. The world's not going to fix itself. And God is not coming in, swooping down on some Pegasus to fight our battles for us, because he's already given us everything we need. He has given us the insight to know right from wrong. He has given us the strength to persevere when things are hard. And he has given us communities and friends and families that ally on that same side. And if you want it to be better, It's up to you. The story of Noah's Ark is not about cute animals, and it's not about a funny boat, and it's not about whether or not it really happened. Happy to talk about that at my table. It is about what are we going to do now that it will never happen again. This is a story God put in the Torah at the beginning because every reader of the Torah looks around and says, you know, the world, a lot of people out there doing horrible things. Why doesn't God do something about that? Why doesn't God fix this? So smack at the beginning of the Torah, after humanity has been made, first of all, we realize, yeah, all of us are going to mess up. And second of all, we get a story about how God, quote, tried that once and is never doing it again, so that we're not sitting around waiting for God to do that for us. So that way, for the rest of the Torah, as we learn about what people do, as we learn about the rules, the mitzvot of how we should live, we're paying attention. Because through them, we will build the boat. Through them, we will fix what's going on around us. Through them, we will make ourselves better and everyone else around us better. And God is not coming swooping in, and God is not throwing lightning bolts at your enemy. The story of Noah's Ark tells us that if you think your problems would be solved by just killing the right number of people, then you are part of the problem. If you think that all it takes is enough destruction, you are not understanding God. And that would make God sad. Shabbat Shalom.